The silence before the storm. The Galactic Council was in session, a grand hall filled with the most powerful beings in the known universe. Delegates from 100 different civilizations sat in their high seats, discussing trade routes, peace treaties, and minor conflicts that never truly threatened their rule. The Council had existed for over 10,000 years, and in all that time, no force had ever challenged its authority. Until today, a sudden alarm rang through the chamber. The massive holographic screen at the center of the hall flickered, then displayed a single image. An unknown warship had just entered Council space. It was unlike anything they had ever seen. It was massive, larger than any warship in the Council's fleet. Its design was sleek yet intimidating, as if crafted for one purpose alone: domination. The hall erupted into chaos. Where did it come from? One of the generals demanded. It appeared out of nowhere. A technician stammered, sweat dripping down his forehead. No hyperspace signature. No jump coordinates. One moment, space was empty. And the next, it was just there. The High Chancellor, a tall, imposing figure with silver eyes, raised his hand, and the room fell silent. Have they sent a transmission? The technician hesitated. Not yet, sir. But, he swallowed. They're waiting. The Chancellor's eyes narrowed. Waiting for what? No one had an answer. On the outer edge of Council space, the warship floated silently in the void, its black hull absorbing the distant light of a dying star. It was a ghost, a shadow among the stars, yet it carried a presence that made even the bravest warriors shiver. Inside the command bridge, Admiral Jonathan Hale stood with his hands behind his back, staring at the holographic display. His crew was silent, disciplined, and ready. Any movement from the Council? Hale asked. None, his communications officer replied. They're confused, afraid. Hale smirked. Good. He turned to his weapons officer. Status report. All systems green. Shields at full capacity. Weapons armed. If they try anything, they'll regret it. Hale nodded, then looked at his tactical officer. And their fleets. Spreading out. They think they can surround us. The officer chuckled. They don't realize it won't make a difference. Hale leaned forward, his voice calm but firm. Open a transmission. A moment later, the message was sent across the stars, reaching the heart of the Galactic Council. This is the Terran warship Omen. Respond accordingly. Back at the Council chambers, every screen in the chamber flashed with the message. The words were simple yet terrifying. The silence that followed was thick with fear. Terran, one of the Council members whispered. Who are they? No one had an answer. Scan their ship, the High Chancellor ordered. Find out what we're dealing with. The scanners activated, waves of data flowing through the computers. Then, suddenly, the systems froze. The screen glitched, then went dark. Tell you what happened. One of the analysts stammered. The ship, the lead scientist's voice trembled. It's resisting the scans. No readings, no energy signatures. It's like it's absorbing our technology. A cold chill ran through the room. The High Chancellor's voice was sharp. Send a fleet. The first mistake. A fleet of 30 Council warships was dispatched, their weapons charged and ready. The fleet's admiral, Xalvok, a veteran warrior with centuries of experience, gave the standard warning. Unidentified vessel, you are in restricted space. Identify yourself or be destroyed. For a moment, there was no response. Then, a new message appeared. We do not ask permission. Before Xalvok could react, the warship did something no one expected. It activated an energy field. Every single ship in the fleet lost power. Engines died. Shields collapsed. Weapons systems went dark. The fleet drifted, helpless. Admiral Xalvok's hands trembled as he tried to restart the systems. What is this? Some kind of EMP? No, sir, his engineer said in a horrified whisper. It's worse. It's control. Zalvok's heart pounded. This was not an attack. It was a warning. And for the first time in his long life, he felt true fear. The galaxy holds its breath. Back at the council chambers, every leader, every warrior, every scientist stared at the frozen screens. A single human ship had rendered their most elite fleet powerless, without even firing a shot. The message was clear. The galaxy had never faced an enemy like this before. And now, the silence before the storm had ended. The first contact, a show of power. The Galactic Council's fleet floated dead in space. 30 of the most advanced warships, each equipped with shields strong enough to withstand a planetary bombardment, were now nothing more than lifeless husks. Admiral Zalvok's breathing was heavy. His reptilian fingers trembled as they hovered over his control panel, trying, failing, to override the system lockdown. Nothing worked. The engines refused to start. The weapons wouldn't respond. Even the distress signals were jammed. A single ship, a Terran warship, had done this, without firing a single shot. Zalvok gritted his teeth. "Get me a manual override." His officers scrambled. Their panic was obvious. Some were whispering among themselves, tails twitching nervously, claws clicking against consoles that refused to obey them. "Sir," the lead engineer's voice cracked, "our systems aren't disabled. They're being controlled." Zalvok's stomach turned to ice. "What do you mean?" The engineer swallowed hard. Something, on that ship is inside our systems. Every command we input, it's rejected before it even reaches our core functions. His eyes darted to the Admiral. "We're not just frozen, sir. We've been hijacked." The realization hit like a meteor impact. This wasn't an attack. This was a demonstration. A cold mechanical voice crackled through the fleet's speakers, overriding all channels. "You are not ready for war with us. Stand down." Silence. The voice was unlike anything Zalvok had ever heard. It was calm, cold, absolute. The Admiral clenched his fists. "Who are you?" he demanded. A pause. Then the same chilling voice replied. "We are humanity." Panic in the Galactic Council. The moment the message reached the council chambers, chaos erupted. Hundreds of voices filled the grand hall. Politicians, admirals, and scholars from every corner of the galaxy shouted over one another. Fear, confusion, desperation. The High Chancellor stood motionless, his mind racing. A species they had never encountered before, humans, had just crippled one of their strongest fleets without even breaking a sweat. This cannot be possible," roared the delegate from the Typhos Dominion. His 3 eyes blinked rapidly, a clear sign of distress. "No single ship has ever held such power." "We need more information," said a deep-voiced senator from the Corvan Empire. "Who are these humans? Where did they come from?" The High Chancellor turned to his intelligence chief. "What do we know about them?" The intelligence officer hesitated. "Almost nothing, Chancellor. We had dismissed them as an insignificant species, a backwater civilization that never engaged in galactic affairs. And yet here they are," the Chancellor murmured. His silver eyes narrowed. "This is no backwater civilization. This is a predator." A sudden, eerie hush spread through the chamber. For thousands of years, the Galactic Council had ruled uncontested. They had crushed rebellions, silenced threats, wiped out entire species that refused to submit. But now, they were the ones being hunted. The Second Fleet moves. Desperation makes people foolish. Despite their fear, the Council could not allow this humiliation to stand. They would not accept weakness. A Second Fleet was assembled. This time, not 30 ships, but 500. Warships from every major empire, the strongest fleet the galaxy had ever seen. Zalvok, still trapped in his dead flagship, received a priority transmission. "Admiral," the High Chancellor's voice was sharp. "The Second Fleet is en route. They will engage the Terran ship immediately." Zalvok's blood ran cold. "No. Chancellor, "You don't understand," he said quickly. "This is not an enemy we can fight. Our weapons, our shields, our ships, none of it matters. The Chancellor cut him off. "I will not allow a single primitive ship to hold this council hostage. The fleet has its orders." The transmission ended. Xalvok closed his eyes, feeling a deep, terrifying certainty settle in his chest. This was going to be a massacre. The second mistake. The second fleet arrived in full formation, a wall of warships stretching across space. They outnumbered the Terran warship Omen 500 to 1. Their admiral, Dallas Varus, sent the standard warning. "Unidentified vessel. You are surrounded. Power down your systems, or we will open fire." Silence. Varus gritted his teeth. He hated silence. "Prepare to fire," he ordered. The fleet's cannons charged, massive weapons that could tear moons apart. Then, the Omen vanished. Varus's heart stopped. Where? Before he could finish his sentence, the Terran warship reappeared behind the fleet. "Impossible," someone screamed. But it was happening. The Omen fired a single pulse wave. Not an explosion, not a laser, just a wave of something unseen. Instantly, every warship in the fleet lost control. Engines died. Weapons froze. Shields collapsed. 500 warships, dead in the void. Varys stared at his controls in horror. This was beyond technology. Beyond war. This was something else. Then the voice came again. "We are not conquerors, but we will not tolerate threats." Varys' hands shook. His mind screamed at him to do something. Anything. But there was nothing left to do. Humanity had already won. Fear spreads across the stars. News of the Second Fleet's defeat spread through the galaxy within hours. Planets that had once laughed at the idea of humans now whispered in terror. Empires that had ruled for millennia now questioned their own survival. The Galactic Council held another emergency meeting. The High Chancellor stood before them, his voice grim. "We have two options," he said. "We either submit or negotiate." Silence. Then, after a long pause, a message was sent to the Omen. "We are listening. What are your terms?" The galaxy held its breath. Fear spreads like wildfire. The message had been sent. For the first time in the history of the Galactic Council, they were the ones asking for terms. The council chamber was silent as the transmission was relayed to the Terran warship Omen. Billions across the galaxy waited. Governments, military leaders, civilians, waiting to know their fate. Would the Terrans conquer? Would they destroy? Would they demand tribute? The seconds stretched into minutes. The Omen remained still, floating among the shattered remains of the fleets that had dared to oppose it. The warship had yet to fire a single destructive shot, yet it had already brought entire civilizations to their knees. Then, at last, the reply came. It was not a declaration of war, not a demand for surrender, not even a warning. It was three simple words. "We are watching." The galaxy in panic. The moment those words were transmitted, the Galactic Council fell into absolute chaos. "What does it mean?" roared the ambassador from the Etheri Dominion, his gills flaring. "Are they threatening us?" The High Chancellor's face was like stone. He stared at the message, repeating it over and over in his mind. "We are watching." "They could mean anything," murmured the intelligence chief. "They are waiting, studying us." The room erupted again. Some demanded immediate war, suicide as it was, while others argued for total submission. The panic spread far beyond the council. Entire planets fell into hysteria. The news channels played endless footage of the ghostly Terran warship, its black hull reflecting the distant light of stars. Military analysts speculated wildly. Conspiracy theorists screamed about hidden Terran armadas waiting in the void. On some planets, riots broke out. On others, leaders abdicated their thrones, convinced that humanity had already won. And the scariest part, The omen had done nothing. It had simply arrived. And that was enough to break the foundations of the galaxy. The fall of the Ivran Empire. Panic breeds weakness. Weakness leads to collapse. The first empire to fall was the Ivran Dominion, a civilization that had existed for nearly 8,000 years. Their people, reptilian and warlike, had built their power through sheer military dominance. They ruled through fear. And now, that fear turned inward. A faction within the Ivran High Command believed the omen was the first of a Terran invasion fleet. That soon, hundreds, maybe thousands, of similar warships would arrive, unstoppable and merciless. Instead of preparing for diplomacy, they prepared for desperation. The Ivran warlords turned their weapons on each other, arguing over who should lead them in the coming final war. Entire cities were leveled. Fleets that had once dominated the stars were shattered, not by Terrans, but by their own paranoia. In just 1 week, the mighty Ivran Dominion collapsed. And humanity never fired a single shot. The Merchant Guild's betrayal. Meanwhile, on the trade hub world of Veltarn, the wealthiest factions of the galaxy gathered in secret. The Interstellar Merchant Guild, an ancient neutral organization that controlled trade routes between hundreds of star systems, held an emergency summit. Their decision was swift. They would side with humanity. Unlike the military leaders and politicians, the Guild saw the truth. Whoever sided with humanity first would hold power when the dust settled. A secret envoy was dispatched. A small fleet of luxury ships, painted in gold and silver, made their way toward the omen. They broadcast a message on all channels. We wish to negotiate exclusive trade deals with the Terran people. We offer wealth beyond measure. For the first time since its arrival, the omen replied immediately. One word. Denied. The Guild was stunned. They were used to being treated like kings. Their wealth controlled entire star systems. But the Terrans didn't want their money. They didn't need it. And that terrified the Guild more than anything. The Shadow War begins. The realization that humanity could not be bribed sent shockwaves through the galaxy. The most powerful factions, the ones who had profited from war, corruption, and slavery for centuries, began to conspire. If humanity could not be bought, and they could not be fought, then there was only one option left. They had to be eliminated. Dark meetings were held on distant moons. Assassins and spies were dispatched to the edges of known space, searching for any information on the Terran homeworld. The Galactic Council itself, divided and desperate, turned to its most feared warriors. The Draken Legion, a secret fleet hidden deep within the galactic core, trained in the arts of stealth warfare and planetary annihilation. The mission was clear. Find Earth. Destroy it. End the Terran threat before it can grow. The Omen's final warning. As these conspiracies unfolded, the Omen remained motionless in space, silent, watching. Then, without warning, it sent out one final transmission, broadcast across every channel, on every planet, in every corner of the galaxy. A warning that would never be forgotten. We know what you plan. You will fail. And if you come for our world. A brief pause. Then, in a voice so cold and final that it sent a primal terror through every living being, the message concluded. We will burn yours to the ground. Then, in an instant, the Omen vanished. Not through hyperspace, not through a known method of travel. It simply disappeared, leaving nothing behind, except fear. The galaxy stands on the edge of oblivion. Panic gripped the Council. The leaders of 1,000 worlds stood in stunned silence, knowing they had only two choices. 1. Surrender to humanity. 2. Risk total extinction. But some were still too arrogant to accept the truth. The Draken Legion was already in motion. The greatest shadow war in history had begun, and the galaxy's final fate was now sealed. Either humanity would fall, or the galaxy would burn. The failed ambush. The galaxy was on the brink. The Terran warship Omen had vanished, but its warning remained, echoing in the minds of every leader, every soldier, every being who had dared to challenge humanity. And yet, despite the fear, despite the clear, undeniable proof of humanity's overwhelming power, some still believed they could strike first. The Draken Legion, the Council's secret weapon, the deadliest fleet in the galaxy, was given a single order: find Earth, destroy it, end the Terran threat. But they didn't realize one simple truth. They weren't hunting humanity. Humanity was hunting them. The Draken Legion's hunt begins. The Draken Legion had never failed a mission. They were the Council's silent enforcers, an elite force of warships, assassins, and shadow operatives that had brought empires to their knees. Their ships were invisible to normal sensors, cloaked in advanced stealth fields. Their orders were simple: locate the Terran homeworld, strike before they could react, eliminate humanity before they became unstoppable. They spread across the void like ghosts, their fleet moving through uncharted space, scanning, searching, hunting. They had destroyed planets before. They had silenced entire species before. They believed humanity would be no different. They were wrong. The shadow of the Omen. It started with whispers. Draken ships, moving in small squadrons, began disappearing. Not in battle, not from malfunctions. They simply stopped responding. One by one, ships would report back to command, their transmissions routine, until, without warning, they cut out mid-sentence. The last words of one squadron leader were chilling. "We have movement on the scanners. Checking it out." Silence. Gone. No wreckage, no distress calls, no hyperspace signatures. Just gone. The Draken commanders began to worry. Had they underestimated the humans? Had the Terrans already found them? No. Impossible. Their stealth technology was the most advanced in the galaxy. There was no way humanity, a species that was supposedly primitive until now, could detect them. And yet, the disappearances continued. Within days, 36 ships were lost. The Draken command was now in a state of panic. Then, one ship finally sent a partial transmission before vanishing. It was fragmented, corrupted, but one phrase was clear: "The Omen. It's here." Then, static. The hunter becomes the hunted. Admiral Varzol of the Draken Legion had led over 1,000 campaigns. He had seen civilizations rise and fall. He had burned cities, shattered fleets, and stood victorious over the ruins of entire empires. But never, not once, had he experienced fear. Until now. His fleet, once the deadliest force in the galaxy, was now blind. Wherever the Omen was, it was watching them, studying them, waiting. And the worst part, no one could see it. No radar signatures, no hyperspace trails, nothing. It was as if the warship was a ghost, lurking in the dark void of space, striking without warning, then vanishing before anyone could react. Varzol clenched his fists. He would not be hunted. Not like this. He sent out a command. All ships, form a defensive perimeter. Activate full stealth fields. Prepare for counterattack. He refused to run. He would lure the Omen into the open. Then he would kill it. Or so he thought. The trap is set, and fails instantly. The Draken Legion, now desperate, gathered their remaining ships, 200 in total, and set up an ambush. They positioned themselves in a dense asteroid belt, using the floating debris as natural cover. Their ships powered down, going into complete silence mode. No energy signals, no movement, no transmissions, just waiting. They were sure that when the Omen came, it would have no idea they were there. They were sure it would fall into their trap. But then, something moved. Varzol barely had time to react. The Omen had not fallen into their trap. It had been there the entire time, hidden, silent, watching them as they had set up their own trap. Then, Before they could react, the attack began. The fall of the Draken Legion. It wasn't a battle. It was a slaughter. The Omen didn't attack like a normal warship. It didn't fire traditional weapons. It didn't use missiles or plasma cannons. Instead, it hacked their systems in real time. One by one, Draken ships lost control. Pilots screamed as their engines shut down. Their shields collapsed. Their weapons locked them out. Some tried to fire, but their own cannons turned on them, blasting their allies apart. Others tried to flee, but their navigation systems forced them straight into asteroid fields, tearing them apart. It was as if the Omen wasn't fighting them. It was playing with them. Varzol could only watch in horror as his fleet, his unstoppable force, was systematically erased. Within minutes, it was over. 200 Draken warships. Gone. The Omen remained untouched, unscathed. And then, as if to drive the final nail into the coffin, Varzol's command console flickered. A message appeared. One last, chilling statement. "We knew you were coming." Varzol barely had time to process those words before his ship's reactor overloaded and everything around him turned to fire. The galaxy reacts and shatters. When the news spread that the Draken Legion had been annihilated, the galaxy lost its mind. The strongest military force in the known universe, gone in a single engagement. Governments collapsed overnight. Entire fleets refused to fight. Worlds that had once sworn loyalty to the Council declared neutrality, fearing humanity's wrath. The Council itself was in freefall, with members arguing over whether to negotiate or surrender outright. And then, just as before, the Omen sent one last message to the entire galaxy. A message that sealed the fate of every civilization that still believed they could oppose humanity. This is your final warning. And then, just like before, the Omen vanished, leaving behind nothing except fear and the terrifying truth. Humanity was inevitable. The message to the galaxy. The galaxy was silent. Not the silence of peace, not the silence of diplomacy. This was the silence of pure terror. The Draken Legion, the most elite force in the Galactic Council's history, had been wiped out. Not in a long war, not in a brutal battle. It was a massacre. Humanity's warship, the Omen, had annihilated them effortlessly. Now, every government, every empire, every fleet in the galaxy stood on the edge of collapse. They knew now, beyond any doubt, they were powerless. And then, when the fear had reached its peak, when every world held its breath, humanity sent its final message. The broadcast that shook the stars across every planet, every moon, every space station, all transmissions went dark. News channels, military networks, private communications, everything shut down. Then, without warning, a signal appeared. A transmission. No encryption, no interference. Every being in the galaxy could see it. And on their screens, a human appeared, the face of humanity. It was the first time anyone had seen one. A lone man stood in a dark room, dressed in a crisp military uniform. His eyes were cold, unshaken. Behind him, a massive, faintly glowing screen displayed an image, Earth. Then, in a voice calm, controlled, and absolutely terrifying, he spoke. "We are humanity. You sought to destroy us. You failed. You sought to hunt us. We hunted you instead. You sought to end us before we could rise." He paused. Then, in a voice that sent shivers down the spines of every leader, every soldier, every citizen watching, he said, "You were already too late." The silence that followed was deafening. The truth revealed. Then, for the first time, the galaxy saw what they had feared most. Humanity was never primitive. They were never a backwater species. They had been watching, waiting. The screen behind the man shifted, revealing something that froze the blood of every military leader watching. A fleet. Not one warship. Not 10. Hundreds. Sleek, black warships, each one the size of the Omen, each one ready. And then, the camera zoomed out. The fleet stretched further than the eye could see. Thousands of ships, hidden in the darkness of space, their weapons silent, but waiting. The galaxy had assumed the Omen was humanity's greatest weapon. They had been wrong. It was just the first. The human on the screen let the image sink in before speaking again. We have no interest in conquest. We do not seek to rule you. But if you ever come for us again, if you ever threaten our home, our people. He stepped closer. And then, in a voice void of emotion, he said the words that would be burned into the minds of every being for generations to come. We will burn your worlds to ash before you even realize we are there. You are not prepared for war with us. Do not make us prove it. Then, with no further explanation, the screen went black. The broadcast ended, and in that moment, the entire galaxy understood the collapse of the old powers. Panic swept through the great empires. Worlds that had once ruled with absolute power now feared for their survival. The Galactic Council was fracturing. Some factions demanded peace, some demanded surrender, but others still believed they could stop what was coming. The High Chancellor's final decision. In the depths of the Galactic Council chambers, the remaining leaders of the galaxy stood in shock. Some were still in denial. They must be bluffing, one senator whispered. They wouldn't. The High Chancellor's fist slammed onto the table. They destroyed the Draken Legion like they were nothing, he growled. We are not dealing with bluffs. His silver eyes burned with something that few had ever seen from him. Fear. We have two choices, he said slowly. We either negotiate, or we pray they show mercy. Silence. No one spoke. Then, for the first time in recorded history, the Galactic Council, the rulers of the stars, sent a message of surrender to a species they once considered unworthy of notice. The warning is heard. As the galaxy watched, waiting for humanity's response, the Omen reappeared. Not near the Council, not near any major fleet. It appeared above a remote world, a world that had secretly supported the Draken Legion's attack on humanity. Without a word, without a negotiation, without a warning, the planet was erased. One moment, it was there. The next, nothing but dust. The message was clear. Humanity was done talking. The new era begins. Within hours of the attack, entire civilizations submitted. The Galactic Council was dismantled. The remaining fleets were disbanded. For the first time in galactic history, there was no war. Not because of peace, but because no one dared to fight. And at the center of it all, humanity stood victorious. Not as conquerors, not as rulers, but as something far, far worse. A watching force. The silent predator. Waiting. The final message. The galaxy had learned its lesson. Humanity had never needed war, because war was already over before it even began. And as the stars trembled, fearing the day they might challenge them again, a final message was transmitted. One last warning. Remember this day. Remember what we are. Because next time, we will not be merciful. And then, the Omen vanished one last time, leaving behind only silence and fear. The Council's dilemma. The Galactic Council was gone, not by conquest, not by war. It had simply collapsed under the weight of its own fear. The moment humanity's warship, the Omen, erased a planet without hesitation, every leader, every admiral, every empire that once ruled the stars surrendered. Not because they wanted to, but because they had no choice. Humanity had made its position clear. They were not conquerors. They were not invaders. But they were something far worse, a power that could erase worlds without warning, a force that would never be stopped. And now, for the first time in history, the galaxy stood on the edge of a new era, one where the old rulers were gone, and humanity stood in the shadows, watching, waiting, ready to strike if provoked. But there was one problem. Not everyone was willing to accept the new reality. And in the darkness, whispers of defiance still remained. The secret gathering. Though the Galactic Council had fallen, not everyone had abandoned the idea of resistance. In a hidden station, far beyond the reach of normal trade routes, a meeting was held. The last remaining leaders of the once great empires gathered in secret. The remnants of the Etheri Dominion, the survivors of the Draken Legion's command, the merchant kings who had lost everything. They sat in a dark chamber, a circular table in the center, holograms flickering above them. Each one had the same look in their eyes. Fear, hate, desperation. A towering alien, his armored plates gleaming under the dim light, slammed his fist on the table. "This cannot be the end," he snarled. "We cannot just bow to these creatures." The others murmured in agreement. They wiped out the council without even trying. Another leader hissed, his many eyes narrowing. They destroyed an entire planet as if it was nothing. "Then we must strike first." The room fell silent. The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of what they meant. A rebellion, a final stand against humanity. One last attempt to destroy them before it was too late. But how? One of the strategists finally asked. "Their technology is beyond anything we've seen. They move without being detected. Their weapons bypass our shields. They are untouchable." A cold voice cut through the room. "No one is untouchable." The figures turned toward the speaker. An old, frail-looking alien, his body scarred from centuries of war. But his mind, still as sharp as ever. "Humanity is powerful, yes," he admitted, "but they are not gods." He stood up, his gaze burning with something dangerous. "They have a weakness." The room leaned in. What weakness? The old warlord smirked. Their mercy. The plan to provoke humanity. The rebels knew that attacking head-on was suicide. Humanity had made it clear they would erase any direct threat before it could even blink. But what if? What if they could force humanity's hand? What if they could make them reveal their secrets? What if they could make them show the limits of their power? And most importantly, what if they could push them into war? Because if humanity went to war, if they showed the true extent of their strength, it would do one of two things: prove they could be beaten, or force the rest of the galaxy to unite against them. Either way, it was better than living under the fear of the unknown. And so, the plan was simple. They would strike not at humanity's military, not at their fleets, but at something they had shown they valued more than war: their people. The first act of defiance. The rebels moved quickly. They knew time was against them. The longer they waited, the more their fear would consume them. They hunted for any trace of humanity's colonies. For weeks, they searched, scanning systems, infiltrating old records, questioning black market traders. And then, they found it. A Terran outpost, a small colony on the edge of the galactic map. No warships, no defenses, just families, workers, farmers, scientists. It was the perfect target. And so, they attacked. The massacre that changed everything. The attack was swift and brutal. The rebels stormed the colony with everything they had. They killed without mercy. They left no survivors. Men, women, children, all were executed. And before they left, they made sure of one thing. They broadcasted the massacre to the entire galaxy. They wanted humanity to see. They wanted humanity to know. They'd wanted humanity to feel rage. Because if they could force humanity into a war, if they could make them lose control, then maybe, just maybe, they could still win. They believed that if they could break humanity's illusion of invincibility, they could show the galaxy that humanity was just like any other species, that they could bleed, that they could be defeated. But they had made one critical mistake. They assumed that humanity's greatest strength was their weapons. They assumed that their most dangerous trait was their technology. They assumed that the Omen was the peak of their power. But they were wrong. So very, very wrong. Because humanity's greatest strength was not their warships. It was their wrath. And now, the wrath of humanity was coming. The awakening of the Terran Empire. The moment the massacre was broadcasted, the stars shook. The humans had been watching, waiting. They had held back their full power because they believed the galaxy wasn't worth their rage. But now the decision was made for them. There were no negotiations, no broadcasts, no warnings, only one final order. And for the first time in history, humanity did not send a message. They did not send an ambassador. They did not send a warship. They sent an entire fleet. And as the sky darkened, as 1,000 Terran warships descended upon the galaxy, as the first planets began to burn, the rebels realized the truth too late. They had not forced humanity into war. They had simply given them permission. And now, nothing could stop them. The final revelation. The galaxy had made a mistake. They thought they could provoke humanity. They thought they could force them into war. But all they had done was remove the last restraint holding back the most terrifying force the stars had ever seen. And now, humanity had stopped watching. They were coming. The night the stars went dark. The attack on the Terran colony was supposed to be a strategic move, a calculated strike to test humanity's limits. But what followed was not strategy. It was vengeance. At first, the galaxy didn't understand what was happening. Then the reports came in. Entire planets had gone silent. Trade routes that had existed for thousands of years, erased overnight. Space stations, left as floating husks, burned from the inside out. And then, the real horror began. Because the Omen had returned, but it was no longer alone. The Fleet of Wrath. It started as a shadow on long-range sensors, an anomaly, a disturbance in space. Then, hundreds of ships appeared. Thousands. A fleet so vast it stretched across entire star systems. And at the center of it all, the Omen led the charge. But this time, it wasn't watching. It wasn't waiting. It wasn't warning. It was hunting. The Terran fleet moved with absolute precision, warships appearing out of nowhere, bypassing planetary defenses, shutting down entire fleets before they even knew they were under attack. It wasn't just warfare. It was eradication. The message was clear. There would be no second chances. The fall of the last resistance, the rebels, the ones who had orchestrated the attack on humanity, were the first to be targeted. They tried to run, tried to hide, tried to beg. It didn't matter. One by one, their strongholds were destroyed. The last rebel fleet made its final stand over the planet Dranos IV, a heavily fortified world with planetary shields, deep space defenses, and a fleet of 700 warships. They believed they could hold. They believed they could survive. Then the Omen arrived, alongside 10,000 other Terran warships. The battle lasted 7 minutes. When it was over, Dranos IV no longer existed. There was no wreckage, no survivors, no remains, just an empty void where a planet had once been. And the galaxy finally understood. This was not a war. This was not a conflict. This was the consequence of their actions. The Council's final plea. The remnants of the old Galactic Council sent one last message to Earth. It was not a demand. It was not a threat. It was a surrender. A plea for mercy. For weeks, their message was met with silence. Then, just as they began to fear that no response would ever come, a single transmission was received. A new face appeared. Not the cold, calculated military officer from before. Not the nameless voice that had warned them to stand down. This time, it was the supreme commander of the Terran fleet himself, a man whose presence alone sent fear rippling through the stars. He looked at them, his expression unreadable. And in a voice that carried the weight of an entire species, he spoke. There will be no treaty. The council chamber erupted into chaos. But one of the last surviving senators stammered. We surrender. We accept your rule. The human's eyes narrowed. We do not want your surrender. Silence. Confusion. The leaders looked at one another, unsure of what to say. One of them dared to speak. Then what do you want? For a long moment, the Supreme Commander said nothing. Then, finally, he gave the final revelation. A truth so terrifying that it shattered the last remnants of resistance. The truth of humanity. We never wanted this war. We never wanted to rule you. But you have proven something to us. His gaze hardened. You are unworthy of this galaxy. The leaders felt true fear at that moment. Not because of what he said, but because of what he meant. One of the surviving admirals trembled. Whoa, what are you saying? The Supreme Commander leaned forward. We are not here to conquer you. We are here to correct a mistake. And then, the screens behind him flickered. The galaxy map appeared. But something was wrong. Planets, star systems, entire regions of space were marked in red. A senator's voice cracked. Whoa, what does this mean? The Supreme Commander's expression remained cold. These are the worlds that will remain. A pause. The rest will be erased. Panic exploded in the chamber. This wasn't war. This wasn't rule. This was extermination. A final cleansing of every empire, every government, every civilization that had once believed itself to be the rulers of the stars. Please, one of the leaders begged. You can't just wipe us out. We can change. We can. The Supreme Commander's gaze didn't waver. You already had your chance. Then, with no further words, the transmission ended, and the final phase of humanity's vengeance began. The Night of Fire. The Terran fleet moved across the stars, and wherever they passed, planets vanished. Empires crumbled. Civilizations that had stood for thousands of years were reduced to dust. The final remnants of the old Galactic Council were erased from existence. And when it was finally over, when the last of the old regimes had fallen, humanity stopped. Not because they lacked the strength to continue, not because they were challenged, but because they had accomplished their goal. They had cleansed the galaxy. And now there was nothing left to oppose them. The new age begins. 100 years later, the stars were at peace, not because of diplomacy, not because of treaties, but because the last of those who had challenged humanity were gone. A new galaxy had risen from the ashes, one ruled not by kings, not by emperors, not by councils, but by a silent force that had proven itself beyond all others: humanity. And though the stars were peaceful, though war had been erased, every species that remained knew one unbreakable truth. A truth passed down through generations. A warning that would never be forgotten. Do not provoke the humans. Do not test them. For if you do, they will return. And this time, they will not stop.